Hold on, not focused. All right, here we go. Chapter 62, The Showdown. Daybreak in the foothills and thick gray fog was everywhere. With such poor visibility, the travelers relied on their own senses. They smelled salty air. They felt sandy soil. They heard seagulls screeching and waves breaking. And then they heard the long, low note of a ship's horn. Somewhere in the distance, hidden by the fog, was the ocean. As if to answer the ship, there came another long, low note. But it wasn't a horn, it was a howl. A wolf was following our friends. Brightbill beat his wings and squawked, "Mama, run!" Roz ran downhill, deeper into the gloom. Her feet stomped the sandy soil, leaving behind a trail of footprints. There was no time to hide her tracks, so she just kept running. Blurry shapes faded in and out of the fog, and her eyes darted around to see if there were rocks or bushes or wolves. But the robot should have watched where she was going. She slipped and thumped into the sand, and before she could get up, Shadow was on top of her. The wolf was heavy and strong. He pinned Roz to the ground and locked his teeth into her tool belt. At last he had caught his prey. Violently, wildly, he thrashed the robot from side to side. Roz tried to squirm free, but Shadow's grip was tight. There was only one thing to do. She reached down beside the wolf's snarling jaws and fumbled with the buckle, and suddenly she was loose. Shadow stepped backward. Sorry, I'm going to plug in my microphone here. Shadow staggered backward, the belt dangling from his mouth as Roz stomped away. Brightbill had been circling overhead the whole time, and now he squawked desperate warnings to his mother. "Look out for those rocks! Shadow is gaining on you! There are buildings ahead!" Roz burst through a row of hedges and onto the main street of a seaside village. It was still early, and it was still foggy, and Roz was halfway through the village before anyone saw her. Don't mind my fingers, I've been painting. A man had just left for his morning walk when the robot and the wolf came galloping down the street. The man decided his walk could wait, and he hurried back inside. Shadow swiped at Roz's heels, but the robot leaped away. She soared over a house and landed on the other side. The wolf dashed around the yard, only to see her leaping away once more. This time Roz landed in shallow water. Waves gently sloshed against her ankles. The robot backed into the ocean, up to her waist, and then automatically stopped. Her survival instincts wouldn't let her go any farther. "There's nowhere left to run," Shadow growled as he prowled onto the beach. "Either fight or swim." Roz was trapped. Her body lurched forward and backward as her computer brain struggled to find an escape. And then Brightbill came to her rescue. "This way, Mama." Roz didn't hesitate. She launched herself up from the shallows toward her son's voice. Salt water streamed off her body as she soared through the air. Then her feet pounded into the sand beside Brightbill, who was perched atop an old rowboat. By the time Shadow arrived, our friends were rowing away from the shore. The wolf's face twisted with rage, and he howled from the water's edge. "You made a fool of me, Roz. My pack and my mates have left me. Now I'm just a worthless lone wolf, all because of you." Roz felt sorry for Shadow. She never meant for any of this to happen. But she had her own troubles. The robot's greatest fear was deep water, and now she was paddling through the waves and out to sea. Chapter 63, The Rowboat. The sun was shining, the fog was thinning, the robot was rowing. Roz was no thief, and she didn't like taking that old rowboat, but judging from its appearance, it had been abandoned years ago. She hoped it wouldn't be missed. Anybody who's rowed one of these boats know you're supposed to face backward. That can make it tough to see where you're going. This wasn't a problem for Roz, however. She started off rowing normally, and after several strokes of the oars, her head spun around until she was facing forward. And what she saw was blue sky and dark waves and a sliver of green on the horizon. "We're in the bay," said Brightbill, swooping down into the boat. "To the north is that distant coastline. To the east is open water. To the west is a seaport. And to the south is a village and the wolf." It seemed the travelers had no choice but to cross the bay. Luckily, Roz could row long and fast. Brightbill settled in for the ride, and the robot's mechanical muscles started pumping. She pulled and pulled and pulled on the oars, and the robot glided through the waves. Roz was nervous. Time and again, the robot's survival instincts had stopped her from going into deep water. Now an old rowboat was all that separated her from the murky depths. She couldn't wait to feel solid ground beneath her feet again. As they rowed deeper into the bay, the waves got larger and rougher. Gigantic swells of water rolled in from the open ocean and started tossing the boat around like a toy. The waves finally became too much for Brightbill. He spread his wings, lifted up on the breeze, and anxiously looked at the choppy surf ahead. "Row faster," he squawked. "I don't know how much more the boat can take." Roz tried to power through. She rowed faster and faster until the boat was skimming across the water. Too fast. The left oar snapped, then the right, and suddenly the boat was at the mercy of the waves. "Hold on, Mama!" cried the goose. "Here comes a big one!" The rowboat was pulled up the side of a towering wall of water. It teetered at the top, and then the boat went crashing down the other side with such force that the whole thing splintered apart. Roz felt water surging up around her. She clung to debris and kicked her legs, but she wouldn't stay afloat for long. The robot began to sink. The goose floated above. The ocean rolled and sloshed. Then there was a sudden burst of air from somewhere nearby. Brightbill looked toward the noise, but only saw sea spray drifting on the breeze. And when he looked back to his mother, she was dipping below the surface. "What can I do, Mama?" Brightbill cried from the air. "Tell me what to do." "There is nothing more you can do," came Roz's gargling voice. "I am sorry." The young goose could only watch as the ocean dragged the robot down, down, down. Chapter 64, The Sea Creature. Brightbill hovered on the wind and watched his poor mother sinking into the depths. He could still see her body sparkling brightly against the darkness, but she was fading fast. The goose closed his eyes, hoping this was all a bad dream. He heard the distant horns of ships by the seaport. He heard buoys clanging in the harbor. He heard ocean waves churning and frothing louder and louder and louder and louder. The goose opened his eyes and saw the ocean bulging upward. A giant sea creature was rising from the deep. It breached the surface and sent waves rolling away. The creature had a large mouth and long fins and a wide back that curved down into the water. There was a loud burst, and mist shot up from a blowhole. As you might have guessed, reader, that giant creature was a whale. More of the whale emerged from the darkness until something sparkled in the sunlight. It was Roz. She was sprawled across the whale's back, wet, limp, and lifeless. Chapter 65, The Whale. The whale swam along the surface of the ocean, keeping our robot safely above the water, gently moving her away from the rough waves. Brightbill couldn't believe what he was seeing. Once the shock wore off, he fluttered down to the whale's back and leaned over his mother. There was no life in her eyes or her body, so the goose did the only thing he could think of. Click! Roz's eyes began to glow. She uttered some human noises, and then, in the language of the animals, the robot said, "Oh, Bright Bill, am I happy to see you!" The goose squawked with joy and hugged his mother's face, but she didn't move. The robot had lost the use of her limbs. There were a few tense minutes and a few nervous glances, but as the sun beat down and the wind rushed over her, Roz felt her body drying out. Slowly, gradually, power returned to her arms, then her legs, and she sat up and hugged her son. Brightbill breathed a sigh of relief. "Mama, when you disappeared below the water, I thought you were gone forever." "So did I," said Roz. "As I sank deeper and deeper, the ocean squeezed my body tighter and tighter. I lost control of my legs and my arms. The last thing I remember was a huge shape swimming toward me, and then I automatically shut down." "That huge shape was a whale," squawked the goose. "We're riding on her back right now." A low moan rumbled up through the whale's body. She splashed the water with her fins and took long, wheezing breaths and sprayed mist high into the air. Roz paid close attention to the whale's behavior and understood what she was saying. The whale's name was Coral, and she was thrilled to meet our friends. She explained that a flock of geese had flown over the bay and regaled the coastal birds with the amazing story of the wild robot and her son, the goose. The coastal birds shared the story with the fish and the dolphins and anyone who would listen. In time, the story spread to every creature in the bay. When Coral saw the robot rowing and the goose flying overhead, she knew it had to be Roz and Brightbill. So she swam behind them in case she could be helpful, and it was a good thing she did. As Coral ferried our friends across the bay, the waves grew smaller and the coastline grew larger. Houses poked out from the trees. Sunbathers relaxed on the rocks. Boats motored away from the piers. With so many humans around, Roz had to be careful. She lay flat against Coral's back while Brightbill flew ahead and scouted out the coastline. The goose directed the whale to a quiet, empty cove, and soon the robot was standing on dry land again. Roz asked if there was some way she could repay Coral for saving her life, but the whale was just happy to help. She winked one of her enormous eyes and then sank beneath the waves. Our friends marched inland, feeling lucky and grateful, but as they thought of the journey still to come, their good feelings gradually turned gloomy. Roz had nearly died crossing that bay. At some point, to get back to the island, she would have to cross an entire ocean. All right, that's where I'm going to stop.